I want to be clear about something before I start. I am not the kind of person who looks for trouble. I never was. I was 23 years old, working a data entry job I hated, living in a one-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized Ohio city that had been slowly losing population since the late 90s. I didn't do urban exploration. I didn't have a camera or a flashlight or any of the equipment people carry when they go into abandoned buildings on purpose. What I had was a car that needed a test drive after a repair, a back road I didn't know well, and a Wednesday afternoon with nothing in it. That's how it starts for most people, I think. Not with a plan. The house appeared on my left as I came around a curve on Dellwood Road, about 9 miles outside of the city. It sat back from the road maybe 200 feet at the end of a gravel driveway that had mostly gone to grass. 2 stories. Dark brick, the kind that goes almost black when it's wet. A wide front porch with the railing, collapsed on one side. Every window I could see from the road was intact. That surprised me. A house that far gone, that far off the road, and no broken windows. I slowed down without making a decision to slow down. There was something about it. I'm not going to dress that up with language. It doesn't deserve. It wasn't a feeling of dread or a chill, or any of the things people say when they're telling a story like this. It was just a house that made me slow down and look. Old, quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like weight. I pulled onto the shoulder and sat there for a moment with the engine running. There was no sign, no fencing, no posted notice of any kind that I could see from the road. The grass around the house was tall and going to seed. The trees on the property had grown in close on the left side, branches reaching almost to the second-floor windows. On the right side, a rusted iron fence ran along the property line, missing sections in 2 or 3 places. I told myself, was just going to walk to the porch. That is the most dangerous sentence a person can say in a situation like that. Just going to walk to the porch. Just going to look through the window. Just going to try the door. Each one sounds reasonable until the next one doesn't, and by then you're already inside. I got out of the car. The gravel driveway was soft underfoot, the stones long since pressed down into the mud beneath. My footsteps made almost no sound. That registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but didn't slow me down. The air smelled like wet earth and something else I couldn't identify immediately. Leaves, maybe. Decay. The particular smell of a space that hasn't been disturbed in a long time. The porch steps were intact. I tested the first one with my weight before committing to it. Solid. I went up all 3 and stood on the porch, and from there I could see the front door more clearly. It was closed. Old wood, painted dark green once, the paint now peeling in long. Curling strips. The brass knocker was still in place, tarnished almost black. I looked through the window to the left of the door. The glass was dirty but not opaque. Through it I could make out a front room. High ceilings, a fireplace against the far wall with a mantel still in place, and furniture, not debris, not the scattered remnants of furniture. Actual furniture, a sofa with a dust cover draped over it, a side table, a floor lamp in the corner, shade intact. I stood there for a moment, looking at it. The furniture was covered. Someone had covered the furniture before they left. That meant something. That meant this wasn't a house that had been abandoned in a hurry or through crisis. Someone had taken the time to put covers on the furniture. Someone had planned to come back. I tried the front door. I don't know why I did that. I still don't entirely. It wasn't part of the plan, I'd told myself. But my hand went to the handle and turned it, and the door opened. Not easily. It stuck for a moment and then gave with a soft groan of swollen wood, the way old doors do when the humidity has gotten into the frame. But it opened. It had not been locked. The smell hit me before anything else. Stronger inside. Dust and damp and something underneath it that took me a moment to identify as lavender. Old dried lavender, the kind you put in drawers or hang in closets to keep moths away. Faded almost to nothing, but still there, caught in the still air of the house. I stepped inside. The front room was exactly what the window had suggested. High ceilings with plaster medallions around the light fixtures, though the fixtures themselves were long since dead. The dust covers on the furniture had gone gray with age, but were still in place, still draped carefully over each piece. On the mantel, a small carriage clock sat silent, its hands stopped at 4:20. A framed photograph beside it, too far away and too dusty to make out clearly. I walked further in. The hallway, beyond the front room, was dark. No windows except a small one at the far end above the staircase landing, and the afternoon light coming through it was thin and gray. Doors on both sides, most of them closed. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Not the sharp crack of wood about to give, but the deep, resonant creak of old boards that have absorbed decades of footsteps and are merely registering one more. I stopped at the first door on the right and pushed it open. A dining room, a long table with 8 chairs. The chairs were pushed in neatly, evenly spaced. In the center of the table, a candlestick with a half-burned candle in it. Wax had pooled and hardened on the table around the base. The wax was white, not yellowed, not gray. White. I looked at the candle for a longer moment than I should have. White wax doesn't stay white for decades. It yellows. It absorbs dust and ambient color from the air around it. The wax pooled around that candlestick was too white, too clean. I told myself it was the light. The afternoon coming through the window at a certain angle could make old wax look lighter than it was. That was completely plausible. That was the kind of thing light did. I left the dining room and kept moving down the hall. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a large room with a window over the sink looking out at the overgrown back garden, and another door at the far end that I assumed led outside. The sink was old cast iron, stained with rust, where the faucet had dripped for years. The cabinets above the counter were dark wood, doors closed, a round table in the center of the room with 2 chairs. On the table, a coffee mug. I stopped in the doorway. The mug was ceramic, pale blue, with a small chip on the rim. It sat in the center of the table, not pushed to the side, not left casually, just placed there. The way you place something down when you intend to come back to it. I crossed the room and looked at it without touching it. There was a ring on the table beneath the mug, a dark ring in the wood from repeated use. The mug had been set in that exact spot many times. That ring had taken years to form, but the inside of the mug was clean. Not clean like it had been washed and put away. Clean like it had been recently rinsed. No stain on the ceramic, no dark line of old coffee residue. I picked it up. The ceramic was cold. Of course it was cold. The house was cold. But there was something about the weight of it in my hand, the particular lightness of it that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I set it back down. That was when I heard the sound from upstairs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a single soft sound, like someone shifting their weight in a chair. One creak of floorboard directly above where I was standing in the kitchen, and then absolute silence. I stood completely still. My brain did what brains do. It started generating explanations. Settling, thermal expansion, an animal, a bird that had found its way in through a gap somewhere. All of those things were possible. All of them were more probable than the alternative. I counted to 30. Nothing. I set the mug down and walked to the back door. Tried the handle, locked. I went back the way I came, through the kitchen doorway into the hall. At the end of the hall, the staircase. I looked at it for a moment. Wide wooden stairs, a carved banister. The landing at the top was in shadow, the small window there not providing enough light to see clearly. I should have left. I know that. Looking back, that was the moment. The mug, the sound, the staircase. That was where a reasonable person turns around and goes back to their car. I started up the stairs. The fourth step creaked loudly. Loudly enough that I stopped, one foot still on it, and listened. Nothing from above. I kept going. The landing at the top opened onto a hallway identical in layout to the one below, except shorter. 4 doors, all closed. I stood at the top on the stairs and listened to the house. The silence was different up here. Below, there had been the ambient sounds of an old building in the afternoon, the occasional tick from the walls, the very faint movement of air through gaps. Up here, it was a different kind of silence, denser, like the air itself was holding still. I moved to the first door on the left and pushed it open. A bedroom. A single iron bed frame with a bare mattress, no sheets. A wardrobe against the far wall, door slightly ajar. A window looking out at the front of the property, the road visible in the distance. My car on the shoulder, small from this height. I checked the second door. A bathroom, the fixtures old and streaked with rust. Third door, another bedroom, larger, with 2 windows. I stood in front of the fourth door. It was different from the others. The other 3 had opened with a simple push. This one had a key lock, old brass, and below the handle, a bolt. The bolt was on my side of the door. Someone had installed a bolt on the outside of a bedroom door. That doesn't mean what you think it means. There are reasons to bolt a door from the outside. Old houses, eccentric owners. A room used for storage of things you don't want accessed. Any number of reasons. But I stood there looking at that bolt for a long moment. It was not engaged. The bolt was drawn back. The room, whatever was in it, was not locked. I put my hand on the handle. From behind the door, so quiet I almost missed it, came the sound of breathing. I did not open the door. That's the decision I made. My hand was on the handle, and the sound was there. Slow, steady, unmistakably human. And I let go of the handle, and I stepped back. I backed down the hallway to the top of the staircase. Then I went down the stairs, taking them as quietly as I could, which wasn't very quiet because old stairs don't cooperate when you're scared and moving fast. Down the hall, through the front room, out the front door, which I pulled closed behind me by instinct, down the porch steps, across the driveway, through the tall grass to the road. I got into my car. My hands were shaking enough that I missed the ignition twice before I got the key in. I pulled out onto Dellwood Road and drove, and I did not look in the rearview mirror until I was around the curve and the house was no longer visible. I didn't call the police that night. I've thought about why many times since. Partly because I had been trespassing. Partly because what was I going to say? I heard breathing behind a door in an abandoned house. They'd want to know what I was doing there, and the answer was nothing I was proud of. But there was another reason. A reason I'm less comfortable admitting. I wasn't sure what I'd heard. In the cold logic of my apartment that night, with the lights on and a normal life happening around me, the doubt came in. Old houses breathe. Air moves through gaps and openings in ways that produce sounds. I'd been alone, slightly frightened, primed to interpret ambiguous sounds as threats. The breathing might have been airflow. The white wax might have been the light. The clean mug might have been cleaner than I'd registered. It might all have been nothing. I went back to Dellwood Road 3 weeks later. Not to go inside, just to drive past. to see it in daylight and confirm it was just an old empty house and that I'd scared myself over nothing. The house was still there. The gravel driveway, the tall grass, the intact windows. The front door was standing open. Not the way I'd left it. I'd pulled it closed behind me, I was certain of that. It was standing fully open, flat against the outer wall of the house, as if someone had opened it wide and left it that way. I did not stop the car. I have not driven on Dellwood Road since. I worked the overnight maintenance shift at a textile mill for almost 2 years. That part matters. I want you to understand that I was not exploring, not trespassing, not looking for anything. I was being paid to be there. I had a key, a flashlight, a radio, and a supervisor I could reach in under 10 seconds. The mill was not abandoned when I started working there. It was operational, running 2 shifts a day, 5 days a week. It was a place of work. It became abandoned in stages. The first line shut down in March, the second in July. By September, the production floor was empty of workers during my shift. Just me and the machines that were too expensive to move, and the machines that weren't worth moving, and everything in between. By November, the company had announced closure. By January, I was the only person going into that building regularly. That distinction matters to me. I want to be clear that I wasn't there for any reason other than contract security maintenance. I had signed a contract. I was doing a job. The thing that happened on a Tuesday in February was not something I was looking for. The mill was a converted industrial building on the east side of the city, built in the 1940s, 6 stories of reinforced concrete with windows that ran floor to ceiling on the production floors. During operating hours, those windows let in enough light to work by. During my shift, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, they showed me nothing but my own reflection in the dark glass and the dark city beyond. My route was standard. Ground floor first, loading docks, mechanical room, office wing, then floors 2 through 6, a circuit of each production floor, then back down and a second ground floor check before the end of shift. It took about 4 hours on a normal night. I spent the other 4 in the security office near the main entrance, doing paperwork and waiting. By February, I knew the building the way you know a place you've spent hundreds of hours alone in. Every sound it made, the particular groan of the elevator when the temperature dropped below freezing, the way the wind off the river hit the north face of the building at around 2 in the morning and set the ventilation louvers rattling on the 5th floor. The intermittent drip from a pipe joint on the 2nd floor that maintenance had been meaning to fix for 8 months. I knew what the building sounded like. That's what I'm telling you. On the Tuesday in February, during my first circuit at around midnight, I heard something on the 4th floor that I did not recognize. The 4th floor had been the primary weaving floor. The looms were still there. 42 of them, arranged in rows, bolted to the concrete. They were enormous machines, maybe 12 feet tall at the highest point, all steel and moving parts. And in the dark, they cast long, irregular shadows across the floor from my flashlight. I had done this circuit hundreds of times, and the shadows had never bothered me. You know what things look like after enough time. What I heard was coming from the far end of the floor, near the north wall. A sound like something being dragged, slow, deliberate, not continuous. It would stop for a moment and then resume. The kind of sound you make when you're moving something heavy across a concrete floor and you have to stop and readjust your grip. I stopped walking and pointed my flashlight toward the north wall. 42 looms between me and the source of the sound. My beam reached the first row clearly, the second row partially, and the rows beyond that as a general wash of light that resolved nothing. I could see the north wall in the far distance, a pale strip of concrete. I could not see what was making the sound. I keyed my radio. "Control, this is Unit 4 on Floor 4. I'm getting some movement noise near the north wall. Can you check if there's anything on camera up here?" A pause, then, "Negative, Unit 4. Camera 7 on 4 is showing nothing. Could be HVAC." "Copy," I said. I stood there for a moment with my radio in one hand and my flashlight in the other and listened to the building. The dragging sound had stopped. The floor was quiet. From somewhere below me, the elevator groaned as the temperature continued to drop. I walked toward the north wall. It took me about 2 minutes to cross the floor, moving carefully between the loom rows. The machines were dead, but they were dense, and in the dark the spaces between them were narrower than they looked. My flashlight swept back and forth ahead of me as I walked. Near the north wall, I found it. One of the large rolling equipment carts, the kind we use to move maintenance supplies around the floors, had been moved. It was a heavy thing, steel frame, rubber wheels, that had gone slightly flat from disuse. For the months I'd been doing this route, it had been parked in the northwest corner of the floor, pushed against the wall. It was now in the middle of the floor, about 15 feet from the wall. I looked at the floor around it. In the dust on the concrete, I could see the track marks where it had been rolled. B-cho-e-e, clear set of parallel lines leading from the corner to where it now sat. I looked at the cart. I looked at the track marks. I looked at the north wall. The north wall had 2 windows and a fire exit. The fire exit was a heavy steel door with a push bar. I walked to it and pushed. It was closed, the seal intact, the kind of resistance that means a door hasn't been opened recently. I walked back to the cart and looked at it for a long moment. Equipment doesn't move on its own. Flat rubber wheels on level concrete don't roll without force. Something had moved this cart, and the track marks in the dust suggested it had been moved recently enough that the disturbed dust hadn't settled back. I keyed my radio again. "Control, Unit 4. Cart's been moved on Floor 4. Northwest corner, now center floor. Track marks in dust." Another pause. "Copy, Unit 4. Any sign of unauthorized entry?" "Negative," I said. "All points secure on this floor. Fire exit seal intact." "Copy, log. It, and continue circuit." I continued my circuit. The rest of Floor 4 was clear. Floors 5 and 6 were clear. I came back down, finished the ground floor check, and wrote it up in the log. Moved cart, northwest corner to center floor. No apparent cause, no entry breach. Standard language for something that wasn't standard. I went to the security office and sat down. The security office had a wall of a monitor showing feeds from 12 cameras positioned around the building. Camera 7 covered most of Floor 4. I rewound the footage to the beginning of my shift and let it run on fast forward, watching the 4th floor feed. For the first 40 minutes, nothing. The looms sat in their rows. The cart was visible in the northwest corner, a pale shape against the wall. Then, at 11:47, the cart moved. I stopped the playback and watched it again at normal speed. At 11:47, with no person visible in the frame, the cart began to roll. Slowly, about 6 inches, at a time, with pauses between each movement. It took 11 minutes to travel the 15 feet from the corner to where I'd found it. Then it stopped. No person visible in the frame. Not before, not during, not after. I sat in the security office and watched that footage 4 times. The camera was fixed angle. There were areas of the floor it didn't cover, the northwest corner being fully visible, but the area directly beneath camera 7 itself being a blind spot. If someone had been crouching in that blind spot, they could have reached the cart with a long pole or a rod and pushed it incrementally without appearing on camera. That was the explanation I chose. It was the only explanation that required only real things to be true. I believed it approximately 40% of the time. 3 nights later, on a Friday, I was on the second floor when I heard it again. The dragging sound. Same quality, same cadence, coming from above me. I radioed control. Camera 7 was still showing nothing. I went up to floor 4. The cart was back in the northwest corner, exactly where it had started. The track marks in the dust ran from the center of the floor back to the corner. Someone or something had moved it back. I stood in the middle of the 4th floor at 2 in the morning and looked at that cart in its corner and tried to make sense of what I was looking at. The footage from 3 nights ago was still on the security system. I hadn't told anyone about it beyond the log entry. My supervisor hadn't mentioned it. I pulled out my phone and took a photograph of the cart in its corner. Then I walked the entire 4th floor, every row, every space between looms, every shadow. Nothing. No person, no entry point, no evidence of how anyone could have gotten in or out. I wrote it in the log. Cart returned to original position, northwest corner. No apparent cause, no entry breach. I finished my shift. I handed in my badge at the end of the week. I told my supervisor it was time to move on, that I had another opportunity, that it had nothing to do with the job. He looked at me for a moment across the desk. "The night shift does things to people," he said. "Nothing wrong with that." I nodded. I gathered my things. "Unit 3 quit last month," he said as I was leaving. "Said he kept hearing things on 4. I stopped with my hand on the door. "What kind of things?" I said. He shrugged. "Dragging," he said. "Like something heavy." I left the building. I still have the photograph on my phone. The cart in the corner, exactly where it started. If you look at it, there's nothing remarkable about it. Just a metal cart against a concrete wall in an empty room. What you can't see in the photograph is the track marks in the dust, the ones that lead from the center of the floor all the way back to where it sits. Back, not forward. Back to where it began, as if whatever had moved it had decided to put it away. My brother called me about the house on a Saturday morning in August. Marcus and I are close. The way brothers are when they've both had difficult lives and find themselves in their 30s with less to show for it than they'd planned. He's 3 years older than me, steadier in some ways, more reckless in others. He'd heard about the property through a friend of a friend who knew someone at the county assessor's office. A house at 44 Brenham Street, inner city, condemned since 2018. The estate had been tied up in probate for years. Nobody was maintaining it, nobody was selling it, nobody was doing anything with it. "It's a Victorian," Marcus said. "I'm talking original details. Crown molding, hardwood floors. If the interior is intact, it's worth something." Marcus had been trying to get into property rehabilitation for 2 years. He had a contractor friend, some savings, a plan that depended entirely on finding the right property at the right price. The house on Brenham Street was, in theory, exactly that. "I just want to—" "Look," he said, "you don't even have to come in." I came in. Brenham Street was in a part of the city that had been declining for 30 years and showed it. A mix of occupied houses and vacant ones, some boarded, some not. 44. Brenham sat midway down the block, set slightly back from the sidewalk behind an iron fence that had lost most of its uprights. 3 stories, dark red brick, the Victorian gingerbread trim still intact on the upper stories, painted white once but now peeling. A wide front porch, boards intact. Marcus stood on the sidewalk with his phone out, taking photographs. "Look at those brackets," he said, gesturing at the decorative woodwork under the eaves. "Those are hand-carved. You don't find that anymore. I looked at the house and felt something I didn't immediately name. Not fear. More like the sensation of being looked at, which makes no sense when you're standing in front of an empty building. But the windows of 44 Brenham Street had a quality I couldn't shake. Tall and narrow, the glass dark even in the morning August sunlight, each one reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. You contact the estate? I asked. Working on it, Marcus said. Wanted to see the property first. That's trespassing, I said. It's research, he said. We went in through the side gate, which was unlocked. Around the side of the house, a narrow passage between the building and the iron fence, the ground soft, with years of fallen leaves compacted to a dark mat. A door at the side of the house, wooden, unlocked. Inside, 44 Brenham was exactly what Marcus had hoped it would be. The interior was extraordinary. I'll say that plainly because it's true, and it matters to the story. Victorian houses of this size and this level of detail don't survive intact in inner-city neighborhoods. Most are stripped, the molding, the hardware, the floors, by decades of neglect or deliberate salvage. 44 Brenham had been closed up, not stripped. The pocket doors between the front parlor and the dining room still slid. The staircase banister was carved walnut, dusty but unbroken. The plaster ceiling medallions in every downstairs room were intact. Marcus moved through the ground floor with the focused energy of a man seeing money, taking photographs and notes, checking window frames for rot, pressing on floorboards to test for give. I moved more slowly. The house had a quality that I noticed and kept trying to dismiss. It was too orderly. Not orderly in the way of a house that had been carefully closed, that I would have expected. Orderly in the way of a house that was being used. The mantelpiece in the front parlor was dusty, but in the center of it, the dust had been cleared in a rough circle, as if something had been set there and then removed. The dining room table had chairs pushed in on both sides, but unevenly. 3 chairs pushed flush against the table, 2 slightly pulled out as if people had recently sat and then stood. I didn't say anything to Marcus. He was deep in his assessment, muttering measurements and observations into his phone. I followed him through the kitchen and the back utility room and then back through to the staircase. Second floor will tell me what I need to know about the roof, Marcus said, already starting up. I followed him. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. Marcus worked his way through them methodically, testing floors, checking windows, photographing the state of the plaster. 3 of the rooms were empty of everything but dust and the remnants of window coverings. The 4th room was different. It was at the end of the hall. The door closed. Marcus opened it without hesitation, the way he'd opened every door in the house. He stopped in the doorway. I looked past his shoulder. The room was occupied. Not occupied in the way of furniture left behind. Occupied in the way of someone living there. A sleeping bag on the floor in the corner, recently slept in, unrolled, not stored. A cardboard box serving as a shelf with items on it. A plastic bag from a pharmacy. A water bottle. A paperback book, face down, open to a page partway through. And on the floor beside the sleeping bag, a pair of boots. Not old boots, not abandoned boots. Boots that had been taken off and set neatly beside a sleeping bag by a person who intended to put them back on. Marcus and I stood in the doorway without speaking for a moment. The boots were still warm. Not literally. That I don't know because I didn't touch them. But they looked warm. They looked like they'd been removed recently by a person who was somewhere nearby. Someone's living here, I said. Yeah, Marcus said. We looked at each other. Where are they? I said. That was the question neither of us had a good answer to. The room was empty. The bathroom across the hall was empty. We'd come up the only staircase. Nobody had passed us on the way down. "There's a back staircase," Marcus said quietly. "I saw it, off the kitchen. I thought about that." "So they heard us come in," I said, equally quiet, "and they went downstairs." "While we were on the ground floor," Marcus said. We'd been on the ground floor for almost 40 minutes. The kitchen was at the back of the house, connected to the utility room, which had a door to the rear of the property. If someone had come down the back stairs while we were in the front of the house, they could have been out the back door and gone before we reached the kitchen. Or they could still be in the house. We didn't search the house. I want to be clear about that. We did not do the thing that people do in horror films where they split up and investigate. We went back down the main staircase together, Marcus in front, me behind, and we moved through the ground floor to the side door we'd come in through. In the kitchen, as we passed, I looked at the back staircase. A narrow door, closed. No light under it. I kept walking. We came out through the side door and through the passage and back to the sidewalk. Marcus stopped at his car and looked back at the house. "Someone's been living there a while," he said. "That sleeping bag setup wasn't recent." "We should have called it in," I said. "Called what in? A person sleeping in an empty house isn't a crime." "It is when it's not their house," I said. Marcus looked at me. "Is it mine?" he said. We drove away. What stayed with me wasn't the sleeping bag or the boots, though those were unsettling enough. What stayed with me was the question I'd asked in that upstairs hallway. "Where are they?" And the answer we'd arrived at. They heard us, and they left. They came down the back stairs while we were in the front rooms, and they slipped out the back door, and they were gone before we got to the kitchen. That was the most likely answer. It's still the answer I go with when I think about it in the daylight. But it required something to be true that I kept coming back to. It required them to have known. We were there. We'd come in quietly. The side gate, the side door. We hadn't knocked, hadn't called out, hadn't made the kind of entrance that announces itself. We'd moved through the ground floor talking, yes, but not loudly. Not loud enough that someone asleep upstairs would necessarily have heard us immediately. Which meant one of two things. Either they hadn't been upstairs when we arrived. Either they'd been somewhere on the ground floor, watching us from the beginning, and had slipped out a back way while we were occupied. Or they'd heard us from upstairs very early on while we were still near the entrance, and had moved very quietly down a back staircase and out a back door, without making a sound we'd registered. I went over our time in the house. 40 minutes on the ground floor, Marcus talking about the molding, about the floors, about what the plasterwork would cost to restore. Me following him, looking at the windows, at the mantelpiece, at the chairs pulled unevenly from the dining room table. At the chairs pulled unevenly from the dining room table. Chairs arranged as if people had recently stood from them. I'd noticed that on arrival and filed it under the general category of odd things about the house. If someone had been sitting in the dining room when we entered, sitting at the table, in the house they'd been living in, and had heard the side gate and had moved before we came around to the dining room side of the ground floor, the chairs would look exactly like that. I didn't tell Marcus. I've never told Marcus. Some realizations you keep to yourself. Not because they'd change anything, but because once you say them out loud, you can't take them back. Whatever was at 44 Brenham Street had been there before we arrived, and it had watched us move through that entire ground floor without making a sound. We'd never been alone in that house, not for a single minute.